Friends, hello. This is your guide to the forgotten and astonishing pages of military history. Today we have a topic that still gives me goosebumps, and I'm literally trembling with excitement to share this with you. If you appreciate genuine engineering brilliance, if you believe that genius is born not in the quiet of well-funded laboratories but on the razor's edge between life and death, when the clock is ticking and the enemy is at the gates, then this story is for you. But let me warn you right now. As you read, forget about Hollywood blockbusters where superweapons are created by geniuses with platinum credit cards. This was completely different. This smelled of wood, gunpowder, and desperation. But out of that desperation, a machine was born that was ahead of its time. We're used to thinking of kamikaze drones as an invention of the 21st century, that they belong exclusively to modern warfare, Syria, Karabakh, Ukraine. We watch footage of a small quadcopter dropping precisely into a tank hatch and think, now that's high-tech power. But what if I told you that this power was first tested not in the 20s, not even in the 10s, but in August of 1941? That the world's first land-based kamikaze drone, wire-guided with wooden tracks and a crate of TNT on a wooden frame, crawled towards an enemy tank when the Germans were already storming towards Moscow, and we counted every bullet, every cannon, every single life? Let's rewind the tape of time. Immerse yourself in this atmosphere. August 1941. This wasn't just the beginning of the war. It was a black hole. Our armies were retreating, suffering colossal losses. The German armored spearheads were slicing through the Baltics, Belarus, and Ukraine like a knife through butter. The Wehrmacht was already counting the days until their parade on Red Square. Under these conditions, any idea that could stop the Wehrmacht's armored fists was taken not just seriously. It was grabbed like a lifeline. And it was then that a project landed on the desks of the military leadership, a project that read more like the pages of a science fiction novel than a real official report. The author of this blueprint was a man with an incredible destiny, a third-rank military engineer, the future classic of Soviet science fiction, Alexander Petrovich Kazantsev. I've always been amazed by this phenomenon. Why is it that science fiction writers are often the visionaries in engineering? Because they aren't constrained by established patterns. While academics argue over formulas, a science fiction writer simply imagines, what if? Kazantsev didn't look at the situation like a military man. He looked at it like a creator. He didn't overcomplicate things. He said, we don't need a super tank. We need a bomb that can crawl to the enemy on its own. So, meet the ET-1-627. The name stands for Electric Torpedo, first model, factory number 627. Just listen to that name. It sounds like a starship from a novel, but in reality, it was a wooden frame on little wheels. But let's set the record straight immediately. Many amateur historians like to nod wisely and say, oh, it's just a remotely controlled tank. They already had those in the 30s.
Do I disagree?
Yes, I do. This was a fundamentally different philosophy. Yes, back in the late 20s and 30s, the Soviet Union was indeed working on teletanks. There were vehicles based on the T-26, equipped with Pirat and TOZ control systems that could be operated via radio. These were incredibly complex systems. Imagine a tank packed with servos, gyroscopes, radio equipment, and the most scarce non-ferrous metals. They could attack, lay smoke screens, even use flamethrowers. But they cost a fortune and were unbelievably finicky to maintain. Kazantsev didn't propose a teletank. He proposed a teletorpedo. This wasn't a combat vehicle. It was ammunition, a disposable, expendable item. It's like comparing the space shuttle to an artillery shell. They have different purposes entirely. What did Kazantsev do? He took the chassis from a small tractor, a simple bogie with 4 road wheels per side and a rubberized fabric track onto which wooden cleats were bolted. Wood cheap, effective, and, given the steel shortage, absolutely brilliant. He mounted 2 asynchronous electric motors on this frame, each about 2 to 3 kilowatts. Enough to push the machine at a speed of 8 to 10 kilometers per hour, the pace of a brisk walk. On the front, he attached a huge wooden box. The basic version carried 100 kilograms of TNT. An enhanced version, considered for breaking through fortified areas, carried an unbelievable charge of up to 500 kilograms. But here's the crucial part. It had no onboard battery. To save weight and money, Kazantsev designed it to be powered via a cable. A 3-core cable ran from a generator on the control vehicle. 2 cores controlled the left and right motors. The third provided power. I want you to visualize this scene. There's an operator, not in a cozy, air-conditioned bunker, but inside a shaking T-26 tank converted into a control vehicle. Or maybe just lying in the bushes at the front line, pressing himself into the earth. In front of him is a control panel. The battlefield is shrouded in smoke, and he has to, staring into this inferno, spot a tiny box crawling across the ground. Through the sight, he sees the ET. Maybe the soldiers affectionately called it that, weaving between craters. He has to guide it like a hawk, aiming directly under the tracks of a German Tiger or at the embrasure of a pillbox. One wrong move, and the wire is cut by shrapnel or tangled in the bushes. Or an enemy machine gun burst simply shreds the wooden frame to splinters. Just think about it. The operator controlled this machine from a distance of up to 500 meters. 500 meters under fire. This isn't a computer game. This was hell. And this brings us to the most interesting part, the economics of war. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of a people's commissar of industry in the fall of 1941 for a minute. You have 2 options. Option 1. Build a complex, expensive T-34 tank, requiring tons of steel, an engine, a cannon, and months of crew training. Option 2. Build a wooden cart that a factory teenager could assemble in a basement in 3 days, stuff it with explosives, and it destroys the same tank at the cost of its own life. The choice seems obvious, right? So why didn't Kazantsev get a Stalin Prize, and why wasn't his creation mass-produced by the millions? The answer is more complex than it seems. And here, the real historical drama begins. Archivists and researchers studying documents from those years, including the recent collection The Economy of Victory, published by the Presidential Academy, note that in 1941, the country faced a choice not between good or bad weapons, but between cheap and ultra-cheap. Look at it this way. The ET-1-627 is brilliant, but it required a separate control tank with a generator for support. That's a vulnerable target. Its range was only half a kilometer. What if the fighting was in a city on narrow streets? What if it was raining and muddy? The wooden tracks would get stuck in the black soil. The wire would break. Alexander Kazantsev himself, in his memoirs, describes an incident near Kerch. I've reread it dozens of times, and I get chills every single time. The torpedo darts out from its camouflaged pit. The Germans, seeing this crawling toy, were probably confused at first, but then they opened fire with a machine gun. Bullets pierced the wiring, short-circuiting one of the motors. The machine went haywire. It started circling, like a living creature that's been wounded and is thrashing in agony. And it exploded harmlessly off to the side, throwing tons of soil into the air but not touching the enemy. Only the second torpedo, guided by Senior Lieutenant Peknikov, managed to reach its target. The explosion literally tore the German tank apart. Historians generally agree that during all their use in the Crimean battles, these drones destroyed up to 9 units of enemy armored vehicles. 9 tanks. For us, living in the 21st century, where a single Lancet drone costs tens of millions of rubles, this seems like a drop in the ocean. But for a soldier defending undefended Sevastopol, one destroyed enemy tank is a celebration. It's the lives of his comrades saved. So why was the project shut down? Many liberal historians love to smear the Soviet system. It was rigid, couldn't see genius, they killed the initiative. That's a lie. They didn't kill it. Production was started. Factory number 627 in Moscow received orders for 30 units. Then more. But the end of 1941 was the evacuation of factories to the Urals. The Germans were at the gates of Moscow. Every ton of steel, every kilowatt of electricity, every skilled lathe operator was worth their weight in gold. And the State Defense Committee faced a choice. Produce 100 electric teletorpedoes with wooden tracks that might, under ideal conditions, kill 10 tanks? or produce 1,000 anti-tank rifles that were guaranteed to penetrate the armor of a standard German medium tank from 200 meters? The answer is obvious. War is cynical arithmetic. The ET-1-627 was about 70 years ahead of its time. For the technology of that era, the wire was simply too weak a link. It was a brilliant, bold, but, alas, premature attempt. But so you don't think our engineers were uniquely plagued by backwardness? Let's look at the Western Front. I often get comments, but the Germans did everything better, more thoughtfully. Really? Look at this. In 1942, the German SD, KFZ.302, the Goliath, appeared on the battlefields. You know what our soldiers called it? Goliath. A giant. But it was actually a tiny thing 1.5 meters long. The Germans, aware of French developments, created virtually an analog of our ET-1-627. Only later, they had a stamped hull, a battery or gasoline engine, and a neater layout. But the essence was the same. A self-propelled mine, wire-guided. And what happened? Nothing, really. The Goliaths didn't become a wonder weapon either. They produced over 2,500 of them. But they were slow, lightly armored, and any Soviet boy with an anti-tank rifle or even a bundle of grenades could stop this expensive toy by cutting the wire or damaging a track. The German war machine, often held up as the standard of efficiency, ran into exactly the same problems. Low survivability, dependence on direct line of sight, vulnerability of the cable. So let's not hear about backward Russia. We got there first. We tested it in combat. And we drew conclusions based on the realities of war. Now, allow me to express my personal, subjective opinion. I believe Alexander Petrovich Kazantsev is a symbol of the true Russian inventor. His fate is a litmus test for our attitude towards talent.
Immagine.
This man invented a Wunderwaffe in 1941. He actually created the world's first serial-produced, combat-tested ground drone. Not a one-off prototype, but a real series. His machinery destroyed German tanks. It should have been the pinnacle of his career. But what do we see next? After the war, Kazantsev becomes a science fiction writer. He writes The Burning Island, Planet of Storms, The Phaetons. Why? Why didn't this brilliant engineer go on to build rockets? Why didn't he become the second Korolev? I see a profound tragedy here. The system that won the war couldn't find a place for the lone genius. Kazantsev thought unconventionally. He proposed the hypothesis that the Tunguska meteorite was an alien spaceship. He was fascinated by mysteries, boldly imagined things. In academic circles, he was often misunderstood, sometimes mocked. But does a genius have to be convenient? Remember the story of Sergei Pavlovich Korolev. His path wasn't easy either. But Kazantsev, by creating the land torpedo, proved his ability to turn fantasy into metal. And yet, and this leads us to the philosophical question, what matters more for victory, mass production or genius? The ET-1-627 didn't win the war. The thousands of peasants in greatcoats with anti-tank rifles and Molotov cocktails, freezing in the trenches outside Moscow, won the war. And the T-34s, assembled by women and children in evacuated factories, won the war. But the ET-1-627 showed the way. It showed that the future belongs to robots. And that path, started with a wooden cart on strings, led us to the modern Uruns, platform MS, and the legendary Lancets. I often rewatch footage of the fighting in Syria, then Nagorno-Karabakh, and now the Special Military Operations Zone. When I see a kamikaze drone from a bird's-eye view dropping perfectly into the open hatch of an Abrams or a Leopard, I mentally go back to 1941, near Kerch. I imagine that operator, biting his lip until it bleeds, turning the current adjustment knobs, watching the little tankette that will either die or complete its mission in the next few seconds. It was the same job, the same thought. I'm going to hit that bastard right now, I'm going to destroy him, and I'm going to stay alive myself. Only back then, the operator was inside a control tank, and his drone was dragging a cable tail through the mud. This is why I'm writing this text. I want us to stop thinking in cliches. Stop dividing history into Stalin's repressions and victory marches. History is faces. It's Kazantsev sitting over blueprints night after night in a cold workshop. It's the soldiers of the Podrivnik demolition group, the first in the world to master remote warfare. It's those 9 German tanks that met their end against the genius of Soviet engineering. And now, when they try to convince us that we are incapable of creating high technology, that our share is just raw materials and obsolete AK-47s, I look at a photograph of this funny little wooden tankette in the museum on Poklanaya Hill. I look at it and I smile, because I know the ability to invent the impossible is in our blood. And the ET-1-627 is not a curiosity, not a mistake, but the first swallow. A swallow that, even though it was made of wood, carried the steel soul of victory. My friends, I'm speaking to you now at the end of this long story. We often walk past display cases in museums, our eyes gliding over these primitive mechanisms. We don't understand their value. We think, just a rusty piece of iron, just a cart, nothing special. But the special isn't the appearance. The special is the thought embedded in the design. The special is the courage to pick up a pencil and draw something that never existed before. Please, subscribe to our channel. It's important for us to have more stories like this. Because as long as we remember the names of these inventors, as long as we discuss their fates, the thread of time remains unbroken. And your opinion is very important to me. Write in the comments. Did you know about Alexander Kazantsev and his unusual weapon before? Do you think that if Soviet industry had taken the risk and launched mass production of the ET-1-627 in 1942, could it have influenced the course of the war? Or was it an evolutionary dead end? As many skeptics believe, let's have a real discussion. I'll read every comment, I promise. Your interest is the energy that allows me to dig up these incredible historical artifacts. Remember, the great future is born from the bold experiments of the past. The ET-1-627 didn't become a legend on the battlefields, but it became a legend in the history of engineering genius. And today, when unmanned vehicles enter the battlefield, let's mentally thank that military engineer who was the first to put a soldier behind a control panel, leaving the machine to die alone under the tracks of the enemy. Thank you for reading this far. See you soon. And remember, history isn't boring. It's about all of us.